It was wonderful, and I hope you enjoyed it. And I have the feeling that the weather today will be even better than it was yesterday. So, welcome for this morning. Many of you will recall the German Foreign Minister Guido Westerwelle speaking to us in this room a year ago, addressing key points of the conference theme. Minister, for many of the participants from 100 nations, your address was a highlight last year, and perhaps I can say the highlight of the entire conference. It wasn't only the remarks you made that deeply impressed people, but also the attentive, open way you engaged with them in the subsequent discussion. It is truly a pleasure and an honor for me to welcome you back today, to welcome you back in your hometown, Bonn. Ladies and gentlemen, his birthplace was here in Bonn. That is the applause. And, Minister, it's a great honor, especially given the important foreign relations meetings on your schedule later today in regard to the US President of State, who is going to visit, for a state visit, Federal Republic of Germany tonight. So it's a pleasure that you saved the time for coming here to Bonn and to speak to us. Ladies and gentlemen, therefore, I've had the intention to make some remarks to the theme of our conference, but for saving time and having time to discuss with the Minister, I will put it on the net. And then you can read what the Director General of the Deutsche Welle is thinking about the growth and the future of growth and the possibility media can do. Read it this afternoon. Dear Mr. Westerwelle, thank you again for being here with us. I'm sure that your keynote address will once again stimulate the lively discussion of this conference with roughly 2,600 participants. Not all of them are here. Some of them are still recovering and like the marvelous town of Bonn. So, welcome, Mr. Minister, and we are prepared to listen to your remarks. Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to welcome you to Bonn, which is not only the former capital city, which is also my hometown. It's absolutely true what you said, that I was born, not exactly in this hall, but here in Bonn. I think it's easy to see that this hall didn't exist when I was born, early last century. And therefore, I welcome you once again. It's wonderful to have you here. Be prepared, because I was told that I will address my words in my native language. But before I continue in my native language, I would like to say thank you so much to you, Mr. Bettermann, who worked for many years for Deutsche Welle as the leader of Deutsche Welle. And I would like to say a few words of gratitude. We met each other many times on different places in the world, not only here in Germany. I would like to repeat what I said to you many times. Under your leadership, the Deutsche Welle developed in an excellent way. I really welcome your work. I appreciate what you did for representing not only the media from Germany, but also our German society. I'm grateful. So a few words of farewell. Thank you so much for what you did, and we put our hands together to express our gratitude. Thank you, Mr. Bettermann. And I would like to include in these words of gratitude also Mr. Limburg, who is the incoming director for Deutsche Welle. I wish you all the best, and if you allow me a personal wish, of course, without dominating or influencing the independent media, no doubt about that. Do this event next year again. I think it's a very good place to meet each other here. It's wonderful. So, and to the others, I'm grateful that you could make it possible to be here so early. Depends on which profession you work. My best regards to all the others, and enjoy the nightlife, which is nearly exciting like the nightlife in New York here in Bonn. And I said nearly, close, but once again enjoy it, and I hope that you feel the good vibrations of Bonn and the Federal Republic of Germany, and of course the good vibrations of my hometown of Bonn. And now I will continue in my native language. Meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren,
Ladies and gentlemen,
die Deutsche Welle
the Deutsche
hat in den
Welle
vergangenen 60 Jahren in
has,
der Kultur- und
in the last
Wertevermittlung
60 years,
Herausragendes
has,
geleistet.
well, performed
Deswegen
extraordinary
möchte ich nicht nur Dank
services
sagen an
in the
den Wettermann
conveyance
und
of
Limburg willkommen
culture
heißen,
and
sondern
values. I
ausdrücklich auch
not only want to express my
Ausdruck
gratitude
bringen,
to
wie
Mr.
sehr ich
Betterman
mich
and
über
Mr.
das
Limburg,
Jubiläum,
but I'm also
60-jährige Jubiläum
really
der Deutschen
touched
Welle
by
freue.
the
Ich nehme
anniversary of
diese
Deutsche
Ansprache
Welle.
hier
It's a
zum
pleasure to me,
Anlass
and
und auch
I
als
seize
Gelegenheit,
this occasion that
den
I can
Mitarbeiterinnen und
address you
Mitarbeitern für die
also
engagierte
to
Arbeit zu
thank
danken.
the workers of Deutsche Welle for
In der
their
Globalisierung,
commitment. In
meine sehr
the
geehrten Damen und Herren,
globalization, ladies
verlieren
and gentlemen,
geografische Distanzen
the geographical
an Bedeutung.
distances are losing their
Die Welt rückt
significance.
näher zusammen.
The world is
Hier sind
getting
sehr viele
closer,
sehr junge
and
Menschen
we
in
have
diesem
here a lot
Raum
of
versammelt.
very young people who are meeting here in this room, and maybe they will be the most international generation which ever grew up. So much internationally was never there. And for young people, this is not really conceivable because they grew up self-evidently with new technology. They don't know a world without technologies, at least in the developed part of the world. But for my generation, it was really remarkable. And I belong to a generation where we had a life before the handy, before the mobile phone and cellular phone, but we had completely other communication technologies. Do not think that we had here drums, bush drums. It was before my time. But ladies and gentlemen, the whole technological revolution took place in relatively short time, and it has been now the promoter for globalization. And this globalization is far more than an economic process. It is a globalization of values, of ideas. It is also the possibility everywhere on the world to learn what is happening on other places of the world. And many of the things, of the riots, of the revolutions, movements for freedoms, and also demonstrations which took place in the last century were not less important, but we did not learn about this. We were not really the witnesses of them. We were not there. And everything which you see, which you experience, touches you far more than what you have seen or read after 1 week in a report in a newspaper. So therefore, the participation on world life in real time, this is what changes, of course, humanity. And if the communication technologies have changed, if ways of communication technologies and ways change, these were the promoters of profound changes. And this was the message from the image. Then first, it became for the first time the change from the message from written form. Then we had the message of the image. So first we had then the written words, and these words were spread, and not only the elites just got in contact with this, but the broad population. And from the printed message of words, we had then the transmitted messages on the radio, and then we had also then for the first time not only words, but then we had pictures, images which were sent, and these really touches persons because they are very visual beings. And now we are really also on a similar threshold, like the transition from the agrarian society to the industrial society. Today we are experiencing that we do not only programs which are broadcast, but that we are part, we have become part of this communication. We are on the internet, through the internet, we have possibilities of the social media, and we will see what will remain of this. But we can say now that the speed has increased here, the world is getting more and more closer together, and this doesn't mean that the world is more simpler. But if you see more, then you learn far more. And this, ladies and gentlemen, this will also especially be important for the young people, which I see here, which are 20 years old or older. This will change their lives. It will impress their lives and determine their lives. And maybe they will be wondering now, and they will be wondering, what is he telling us stories from the last century? But ladies and gentlemen, if you are so young as these first row or the second row now, first row which is sitting in the second row, if you are so young as you, then 30 years seem like an eternity. If you are in my age, well, we are the same generation, so to say. I told you that I'm a diplomat. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is something different, and you know how far time goes by. The whole process of the German unification from 1989 and so on. Now, for the people who are born now, this is historically far remote than for me in the 61, the ages of 61, the Second World War was away from us. So therefore you can see how fast things change and in which speed they change. So the more complex things become, the more important the journalism becomes and reporting becomes. And the internet media, which are a blessing but also a curse at the same time, they want to have very attractive titles and also really eye-catchers and simple words in 3 minutes. And these are two contradictions. We have here a more complex world which needs a more differentiated consideration, but on the other hand, we have the simplification which accompanies this incredible competition which also takes place between the classical media and the new media. So you can't really explain the complex world in 3-minute statements, and therefore I also would like to honor the work of Deutsche Welle in this context. And this is not only a one-way road here. We do not only get pictures from remote countries in our screen, but also people in other parts of the world see how we are allowed to live in Europe. And especially young people want to put their destiny in their own hands if they see that things can be done in a different way. When I was talking to you the last time, I talked a little bit about my fresh impressions from the Arabic seasons, which are also sometimes called the Arabic Spring, and the development in these countries are very different, and you know it also very well. So, ladies and gentlemen, the Arabic season started with the suicide of a young man, and he did not get the allowance to be a street dealer to earn his living. So people who, especially in young societies, who suffer or under autocratic systems where they do not have any participation made, social, political, or something else, they are, well, they have the same dreamings of luck and want to go to university or to school, and they can't do this. And ladies and gentlemen, this is a contradiction. We learn far more from each other, and the people on the Tahrir Square, they do not only have fought for political participation. I met them directly after the revolution. I had also unforgettable encounters there, and they touched my heart. It still touches my heart, and it's really unforgettable for me. And I hope that this spirit of freedom and of a new beginning, that this also remains with us. And ladies and gentlemen, on the Tahrir Square, on Cairo or somewhere else, they fought also for economic and social perspectives for people themselves and for their families. And the belief that there are cultures or regions where people do not strive for freedom, this is really something wrong. What we see is that the globalization of values is taking place. And the globalization is not only promoted by technological development, which I mentioned before, but the second large promoter is here the demographic development. Autocrats on the world can ignore a lot of things, and also during a long time, but what they can't ignore is the demographic development. They can't ignore that the young generation is increasing, that they want to have more participatory rights, more democratic rights, and they do not only want to be beggars and they want to get something mercy, but they want really to just shape their life themselves. And ladies and gentlemen, especially in the Western world, and I do not consider the Western world as a geographic region, but also as a community of values, this will influence the Western decisively. Especially in India, there will be 3 times more people living than in the whole European Union together. In Brazil, we have 1/4 of the people who are younger than 15 years old. In South Africa, we have 30% of people who are younger than 15 years. And some days I came back from Pakistan, a country with its own problems. I do not want to address them here. But ladies and gentlemen, there we are talking about 60 or 70%, which is younger than 20 years. And this makes clear to everybody that this will change the world. In Germany and in Europe, we are talking about the demographic development, but in reality, we are meaning that the answers which we have to give for our social security systems, for pensions, labor markets, and other insurances, that this is far more significant and dramatic. In the next 5 to 10 years, we can reach it with our hands, we can touch it with our hands, and the demographic development will be then really then also perceivable in the whole world. And how long will these younger generations will strive for cultural values, for economic values? And how long will it take until they will really want also to shape their lives in the world? And ladies and gentlemen, the whole economic success stories show that it's also just lust for change and lust also for improvement. And the biggest construction site in the world is still in Panama. Somebody from Panama here? In Panama we have the largest construction site in the world, and if you have been there, and I've been there some years ago, and if you see the expansion of the Panama Channel, it's like a small, you feel like a small ant in a giant construction site. And it's really tremendous. And there are 5 or 80 billion euros are spent there in some kilometers. And I think it was also 5 years ago, therefore I corrected myself. But after poll, they decided that this expansion, that this biggest construction site should be done. So poll decided of the population that with 80% that this infrastructure should do. Is somebody here from Singapore? In Singapore, it's interesting to see, and maybe you are also interested in this, and you could see it in the internet. Well, they built Marine Sense, and a big building, 3 skyscrapers, and they didn't have, previously they didn't even have land there, and they have very complex platforms which combine the roof here, and some are now nodding here because they are also interested in culture and arts and architecture, and they have built it for 5 billion euros. So some skyscrapers, it's the new sign, the new symbol for Singapore, and has been constructed in 5 years. And sometimes I come back to Germany and think of stations and airports. And I'm a little bit sad, so to say, because, well, with other words, what was also now observed a little bit self-relaxed, self-content is now challenging. If we want to be better, we have also to speed up. And ladies and gentlemen, this is also the result of a world which is getting closer. We have also reached a lot. Globalization is also valued in a very critical way by some organizations, and the UN also adopted the UN Millennium Development Goals, but you know it already, and you also know that they wanted to reduce poverty by 50% until 2015, you know it, but we achieved this goal already 5 years ago. So what we are experiencing in the world has also caused a lot of problems, but also, for example, a lot of wealth for societies with hundreds of millions have now come to the middle classes. We have more people now in China in the middle classes than we have inhabitants in the United States. And those and who believes really that this wouldn't have any changes would cause any changes of the world? So, ladies and gentlemen, we know from our European experience that industrial development is not a linear process. Of course, there are discussions, also drawbacks, and also just a lot of problems in society. And but if you see this development for example, you see the threats and also the benefits here. For example, use of arms against miners who are protesting, or for example in Bangladesh, the mine which broke down, and it shocked me really, because you have to think until the end. Every of these women or of these who were in this building which went down had their dreams and wanted to earn their livelihood and wanted also to improve something for the next generation in just deepest poverty. And long-term or sustainable economy has more objectives than only short-term profits, but it also strives for wealth for the population. And this is also true for Germany. We promote values, and of course we want also to have social standards in all these countries, and we want also that our companies invest and bring social standards in the other countries, and therefore many companies have also high reputation in these countries because the medical treatment, the payment, and for example also the conditions, for example also the cleaning of exhaust air, that they have really high standards, and I would not underestimate. And I think that this is also an important business card as, for example, clever diplomacy and also economic growth. And ladies and gentlemen, in the G20 we have the countries at same eyes level sitting on the table, which in my youth I studied here in the 80s, which were the developing countries. And this tells a lot now about how things will accelerate in the future. If you see the pictures of the G8, this is a very important encounter, no doubt, but it's not the world alone, and G8 doesn't have the significance for the world like it had maybe 20, 25 years ago. But we have the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, but we have also the group of the next 11, and many of you may come maybe from these countries, from Vietnam, from Colombia, countries which we do not consider in our discussions here in Europe. And we will see also that they are dreaming the same lives, and we are talking about Africa as a continent with big conflicts and also a lot of poverty, but we will see also that there are other possibilities there. And I'd like also to draw your attention that to be sensitive for this, to look at these things closer and also to think about these things and report about this. Economic and political opening normally should go hand in hand. And sometimes you get the question, somebody asks you a question, how can you make, for example, commerce with some countries where the human rights are, for example, are not violated, or some, for example, where journalists or doctors and other people who strive for human rights are then put into prison. But ladies and gentlemen, we have made the experience also in our country, in Germany. We have made the experience that the strategy that change through commerce is also successful. We have also seen the more economic exchange we have, and the more people encounter each other, the more they will also inspired by the values and by the spirit and the ideas. And ladies and gentlemen, the exchange of young people is also important here. For example, in this format, in a certain segment, for example, social segment or international segment, but also students' exchanges are very important, school programs are important, and I think that many of you may be for the first time, if you come from other countries, that you have come for the first time through these programs, and we expand these programs beyond the academic area, for example, to the professional training, dual training, for example. And many of you know how interesting it is to just also deal with this. And it's not only the reality that most young people make their PhD at universities, but many people go through a professional training, and professional qualification is also very decisive for social stability. Therefore, we extend our programs to these areas. It's nothing new that students meet each other, but how to make sure that young people, all the young people, link up together more and more. This is an interesting task, ladies and gentlemen, for you, but also for the policymakers and also especially for economy. And from there we get active civil societies, and I say it also on the background of current pictures. If there are demonstrations, this is not a sign for the problems of a country. It may be a sign for inner insatisfaction because there are some problems. But if people demonstrate, it shows that civil society is getting more mature. And not if we see pictures where people are demonstrating, we should be not concerned if we get these pictures, but we have to be concerned if we do not, for example, if we learn that in certain countries there are no demonstrations at all, and I see it also on the background of escalation and also use of violence in Turkey in the last days. If a civil society matures and if the freedom of expression, if they really want to have this freedom and freedom together, then every democratic person should not be afraid of this, but should be pleased of this. It's a sign that you participate in a value society, and this, ladies and gentlemen, is really far more than political idealism. It's far more than the fact of the United Nations. It's far more than, for example, the professional reporting. And I'd like to come to the end now. Ladies and gentlemen, this is really the best recipe in times of globalization, wealth for everybody, to create wealth for everybody. Only free societies bring the creativity and promote the creativity which we need in order to have cultural, intellectual, social, political, and social economic success. And uniform societies where the differences are leveled out, where people who are thinking the other way, that they have be afraid to be prosecuted. These societies will not be able to bring about the most important thing which is needed. For example, ingenuity, creativity, and this is important for culture, arts, for the spirit. This is the most decisive trigger, but also for inventions, patents, economic success. Free societies are also economically the success societies. They promise success, and if you do not really want to get closer to the ideals of a free society and you think, well, but I do not have to do anything with this, then you should not really if you do not feel obliged for these values of this free society, then you lose a lot. And we have really to promote free societies. And I'd like to tell everybody, freedom of the press, freedom of opinion is the twin of freedom of opinion. And therefore, those two things cannot be separated.
Meine Damen, meine Herren, ladies and gentlemen, you can now put questions to the foreign minister. For those of you in the back rows, you might want to move to the microphones. Just get up and get to the microphones. To those of you in the front rows, it's quite easy. Press the button. Die junge Dame, Deutsch oder Englisch?
English.
English. If you could mention your name, that would be absolutely fabulous.
APA News Agency, Anna Hanım Hidayet, I'm from Azerbaijan. And I have a question to Mr. Minister about bilateral relationship. They say currently that Azerbaijan and Deutschland experiencing crisis in relationship. How would you comment it? And what's the misunderstanding about?
Thank you very much for your question.
Thank you.
The gentleman at the microphone that's already standing. Yep. Should be working. Okay.
Okay. Entschuldigung, ich kenne Guido Westerwelle ziemlich gut, ehemaliger FDP-Mitglied.
I know the Guido Westerwelle very good, and I'm a former member of the FDP.
Entschuldigung, meine Frage
Do you know every member? Yes.
Ich komme
My
auch
question.
aus Aserbaidschan.
I come also from Azerbaijan. I was a former ambassador in Bonn. I'm happy in the world, the happiest man in the world that I can participate here in Guido Westerwelle, and together with Markus Löning. They are very popular. They are the most popular politicians in Azerbaijan. And the question is, Dirk Niebel has proposed, when he was in opposition, that the foreign ministry and the Ministry for Development, Economic Development, should cooperate with each other. But they did it. But now, 100 million euros German tax money were then used in Azerbaijan. But in Azerbaijan, they don't know very much about this, and in Germany, they don't know very much about this. And in the rest of the world, it's 100 billion euros in the whole world, the last year. And the question is, how efficient is it for democracy? Did it play a role here? In October, for example, in the presidential elections, it could be maybe used there. Maybe we'll make one third of questions and then we'll make a second round. I have a gentleman there.
Ja, Herr Minister, Dr. Westerwelle, vielen Dank.
Foreign Minister, thank you very much for your contribution and for your service as a foreign minister. I'm working in development aid in Mozambique, and you say that change through commerce, that it works, but my concerns are that, change through arms commerce, and I think that our work on the field as development helpers is undermined by the fact that Germany still is the third largest exporter of arms worldwide, of weapons, and I'd like to know what you are thinking about this. Thank you very much. I'd like to give you another platform to answer this. So thank you very much for this bilateral development relationship with Azerbaijan. We have a regular and very good exchange with the government, but also explicitly with the society in Azerbaijan. You know that we are guided by those things, the orientation of interests, but also our values. And this is also then set out during the conversations. I think, for example, also on my own visit, but also the committed work of representatives of the federal government. There's no doubt for us that the question of interest, focus on interest for the of our foreign policy and also the values in our foreign policy are very important values for us, or important objectives for us. This is true for all the countries, but also for Azerbaijan. And now the second question, the structural reforms in Germany. I think that Mr. Niebel has made an excellent job, because the ministry which we had at the beginning of this period, of our legislative period, is not there anymore. We have now an efficient ministry, and it is a ministry where foreign policy cooperates with other resorts from other, and we have now network approach, economic support, but also classical development cooperation. And I think that this has developed very well in my point of view, and I think that we are doing very well now. I do not want now to participate in any structural reforms of our government, but the voters have to vote, and we will have to carry out elections, and then I do not want to intervene now in the electoral campaign. I'm standing in front of you now as a minister, and I'd like now to convey you the point of view of the federal government. You have introduced yourself as a person who's coming from or working in Mozambique, working there, and I'd like to say also that these were the most impressive, one of the most impressive visits there in the last years, and not only the work which you are doing there, but I visited also some other projects, and projects, for example, from the German AIDS Foundation also, and you know that these are one of the most important problems there, and I have to say that you carry out the work there is something very good, and I'd like to encourage you, and I also want to really recognize this. And it sometimes sounds easy if people say I'm working in Mozambique. I do not know where you're working, but sometimes it's you can say it easier than do it. So therefore, but it's also, for example, goes also to the belongs also to the fact that also in Africa they are telling now or writing other stories, also economic success stories, and this goes also for Mozambique. And I'd like to come back to the point of the weapons, and I have to say that I'm happy that we succeeded, that the Arms Trade Treaty really has been adopted also in the United Nations, and this is really a big progress. We would have desired to get more, we wanted to get more, but after the many years of failure, it's a big success that some weeks ago I belonged to the first undersigners. These arms trade treaties should implement rules, global rules for the treaty of arms, and that, for example, also vagabonding arms should not cause more uncertainty in the world. And this is one of the important tasks which have been achieved there. Now, referring to the international policy, first of all, I'd like also to I introduced the doubts in the statistics, which you mentioned also. The question is not how many or what volumes are we exporting, but the decisive thing is what are we exporting to whom? This is decisive. And in an exporting country like Germany, if we see the share also of the overall exports in Germany, in 2011, for example, we had the lowest share of arms exports here compared to the general exports in Germany. I think it's since 10 years. So as far, so it was lower than in 2002. So, but we have also to discuss also very clearly what has been exported or what is being exported. One example, if a country like Saudi Arabia is all of a sudden in the newspaper titles because there is a cooperation with Germany, then people can say, how can it be possible? But you can also maybe have a closer look what is being exported. And what has been published here is, for example, here the safeguarding of a border here. So therefore, I'd like to recommend not to just value these things superficially and then express your opinion, but it's important to get into details because otherwise you do not justice to these things. And when I made my visit in 2010 for the first time to the King of Saudi Arabia, then he told me in a long conversation like the others that he was concerned, for example, for the borders, especially in Yemen, and that there could be an influx of terror and terrorism. And you know that this is really a danger in the northern part of Yemen. And is it a legitimate interest to secure the borders or not? I think it's a legitimate right, a legitimate interest. It's an absolutely legitimate interest. And I think if you talk about these questions, you need to have a closer look. Is it a legitimate interest, for example, to cooperate with Israel, referring to cooperation of arms? And there have been a lot of articles now, and I can't talk about the details. And you know that since the establishment of the Federal Republic, we have to maintain these things secretly, treat these things secretly. And I think it's a legitimate interest of Israel in a situation where Israel also has a lot of concerns referring to their safety and existence, and that it's also then armed correspondingly and can also defend correspondingly. And therefore, we have to talk about every individual thing before we make general prejudice and surf here on the wave of criticism. So therefore, it's no use to discuss about these things in an undifferentiated way. And there are some legitimate interests, and also we have legitimate interests, not only our allies. And we have, for example, also cooperation with secret services. And we thought that the two terror attacks which were planned in Germany and which luckily could be prevented, that this was not only the result of our national investigation successes. Oh, please, no. In Bonn, we have found a bag bomb which could be found, but which did not explode. Or, for example, take the Sauerland group. So, if we ignore the legitimate interests, generally it's no use, and therefore I'd like to recommend you, referring to the security policy, to really have a very weighed point of view, and you cannot, for example, also not give the rights to other countries to defend themselves, because for many countries and many civil societies are not so peaceful in many regions of the world. Unfortunately, we have war, and we have also military aggression, and military aggression is often also a means for policy which we have to overcome. So we are now under the dilemma which you showed now, that we have the dilemma of complexity, and we have now to give short answers. There are a lot of people who ask for the floor, and I have 3 in my mind now, last round, maybe 2, but you have to understand, if somebody makes a basic question referring to arms policy, then I have to answer. I'm not really annoyed about this, but I have to say that you have to also to see that these questions in foreign policy are very complex questions, which you have really to, you have also to understand all these processes, and if you do not really see the whole situation, you do not justice to the situation.
Die Dame hatte sich gemeldet
so
und ich
lady wanted us for the floor and then somebody else. This is the next round. Please, short questions.
Mr. Minister, thank you for your deliberation. I'm Shahidul Alam from Bangladesh. I fully support the value systems and the freedoms that you talk about. It is something we in the majority world aspire to. But I do question some of your definitions. I think nations that, rather than putting bank robbers in jail, provide government subsidy to support them, benefit from them. Nations that blatantly conduct extrajudicial killings on innocent citizens against the interest of sovereign nations. Nations that are by far the biggest consumers in modern history cannot be considered developed countries. I come from a majority world country, and in our relationships with developed countries, we find huge inequalities that we have to deal with. At the moment, my organization is negotiating on a contract with GIZ, and in that contract, it clearly stipulates that the author's rights to recognition and acknowledgement and crediting be waived. This goes against the Berne Convention, which both Germany and Bangladesh are signatories to. It goes against the moral and ethical rights of artists in our countries. But these are constantly terms which we are given, which we have to accept in order to get work. These are inequalities where we suffer at the bottom end. I'd like you to address it, please.
Thank you. The lady in the second row, press the red button.
My name is Olga Vesnyanka. I'm a Ukrainian human rights activist and journalist. And as far as you speak about freedoms, there is freedom from discrimination in Europe. So I want to ask your attitude to new law in Russian Federation which ban so-called homosexual propaganda. And also I want to let you know that victims of homophobic violence in Ukraine still are not treated like victims of hate crimes because of not well-developed law against discrimination. So what is your opinion on that, and if you put such issues into agenda when you talk with Ukrainian authorities?
Thank you. The third question in the row. Yeah, it's working.
You just push the button, and if you have a red light, it works. Now, not if you push several times, you switch it off. No, I'm really serious because I worked in this room for nearly 10 years. So
here have been working.
I should know it.
That's one. Okay, my name is Olivier. I work for Vox Africa, African TV channel. I have a short question, but I hope long answer from you. Can you, yes, of course. Can you tell us German politics from Africa? And I think about Togo, Namibia, Cameroon, and I think you know why.
One question from the right.
That sounds like about half an hour answer.
And that's exactly the challenge. Ich will zunächst einmal zu dem, Sie haben ja aus Bangladesch kommen.
Well, you have made more a statement from Bangladesh and have made a more declaration. I do not have to say very much about this, but it was a little bit more polemic, also referring to you are pushing the bank robbers into the jail and the others get more money. But we are doing a stabilization of our world economic system, and it's all our values and also our efforts are well invested there. And if I think of the influences on the world, and I have been also personally in Bangladesh, and I have been talking to the government and the society there. And if you, for example, imagine what it would mean is in Germany, in Europe, or in the US, that the banking system would collapse completely, and that our currencies would collapse, and what social disasters it would cause in many parts of the world, well, it's really so clear that this is really a big danger. And therefore, I think it's right that the European Union, and especially also the states of the G20 worldwide, that they are working on the stabilization of the financial system. But what is also right is that we have to further develop the financial system. This is also a phenomenon of the globalization, that these influences are not bilateral anymore, but that we are intertwined, everybody is intertwined, and which rules should be established now. This is now a topic of the G8, the question, for example, tax evasion or also avoidance strategies. How can you avoid this here? And to create also now guiding rules here and ban but that governments try that the exchange, the currency doesn't break together, because those who would suffer more would be the poorest of the world. And this is what you have to keep in mind. These were the people, would be the people who would suffer more. And there are also some people who recommend the going back to a national currency. And I think in Germany it would be even a disaster. Maybe to some, it would be maybe some also tempting for some intellectual people here. But you can't really imagine what it would mean for many people of the world. And you can't really imagine what standards would break down, and especially also in Bangladesh, to mention this example. Also what you asked now, not only referring to Ukraine and also explicitly to the situation of homosexuals in the world, especially you also referred to Russia. And I'd like to tell you something very clear. I'm not really politically here angry, not all politically, but personally. Everybody should be respected in the way how he wants to live. And everybody should have understood it already. And I think that it's really a topic now. From time to time, I get, for example, like somebody like me with my personal point of view, why I wouldn't fight for the rights of homosexuals and also partnerships, homosexual partnerships. And if I would not, for example, talk from my personal point of view, well, it's really silly. I feel it's even, people can even talk more silly, but this is really, well, it's all more completely stupid. I do not know how to translate now completely stupid. But if a woman is elected for the first time as an federal chancellor from one of the most influential countries of the world, and Germany is also very important, economically very important, to say it here in a very modest way. And if, for example, a female chancellor goes to a country where women are, for example, do not have the same rights, then it's right. And she has also to go to these countries and to show what women can do. And the other thing would be silly if you criticize this. And if I go to these countries, this is the same for me. It's no question that I do not really I do not mention this, or I do not, for example, I do not want to, I do not think that I could embarrass people, but no, I don't do it. But this is a sign of modernity. And if we have here a very diverse federal Germany, Federal Republic of Germany, then it's also, we can be proud of this, and we strive for the values of plurality, and this is what Germany stands, because we have a very diverse society. And referring to Africa also, and at the very beginning of this new legislative period of this government, we had decided an African concept and adopted this, and I'd like to draw your attention also to this fact. Why did we do this? Because we are convinced that these classical corporations with President Obama, like this evening, that they have a high significance. The classical, traditional friendships and partnerships are really something wonderful, and we want to intensify that. It's also important that we also link up with the new power centers of the world in a strategic way, and Latin America belongs to this, and also explicitly Africa. And because I do not want to mention or talk about these two countries which you mentioned here, but I'd like to tell you one thing. Please think about this. And the speeches which I hold here, the words which I have mentioned here, should give you some food for thought, and maybe also give you another point of view which you didn't see before. I'd like also to mention another thing which should be discussed also in my point of view. All the international institutions of the United Nations. So we have also here a UN, we also a UN city here in Bonn. The United Nations reflect in their structures the world how it was after World War II, but it's not the current reflection. And the fact that all Latin America is not represented permanently in the Security Council with one voice doesn't have to do anything with the world of today. These are old structures. And ladies and gentlemen, the fact that the whole African continent doesn't have a single voice in the permanent, doesn't have a permanent seat in the Security Council is the world of the past and not of today, and not even, and even less, it doesn't have to do anything with the future world. And the fact that the whole Asian continent has only one voice, the voice of China, as one voice in the permanently in the Security Council, doesn't reflect the power relations of the world in which we are living, and it reflects the situation when the United Nations were established, and does not really reflect the further development, the future development. And you asked me for the role of Africa. I'd like to tell you now, we should deal also with the fact that our international institutions in the world have to be more representative. If they are not representative, we will weaken them. So all the continents, all success stories, all this has to be reflected in the international organizations. Only then these international organizations will have sufficient authority in the world to avoid and overcome conflicts. So I wish you all the best and enjoy your day in Bonn. Thank you very
dass Sie
much,
da waren,
Mr.
so viel
Westerwelle,
Rede und
for
Antwort
being with
gestanden
us,
haben. Wir
for
haben hier noch einige,
discussions also with
die jetzt
you.
leer ausgegangen
And
sind.
there are
Es tut
some
mir
people
wirklich
who
leid.
could
Ich
not
weiß, Sie
ask their
haben da lange
questions. I'm sorry, you have
gestanden.
been standing
Wir
there
haben
a
einen
long
gemeinsamen
time,
Feind und der ist die
but
Zeit.
we
Aber
have
eine
a
gute Nachricht
joint
habe, meine Damen
enemy
und Herren,
this
die
is
Workshops
time.
fangen eine
But ladies and
Viertelstunde
gentlemen,
später an.
the
Nochmal
workshops will
Ihnen
start
vielen Dank.
quarter an
Ich weiß,
hour
dass Sie
later, and thank
Nachfolgetermine
you for
haben
coming
und deshalb
here.
auch wirklich
And
weg
I know
müssen.
also
Vielen Dank,
that
dass
you
Sie da
have
gewesen sind.
other
Meine Damen und Herren, alle
appointments
Workshops
afterwards.
fangen
So
erst eine
ladies and gentlemen, all
Viertelstunde
the
später
workshops
an.
will start
Das
a
heißt
quarter of
um
an hour
Viertel
later.
vor
So
12.
at a quarter to 12.